You mentioned the Mideast. A few months ago, King Abdullah, a great ally of the United States in Jordan, came to Washington, D.C. and the Congress and complained that our State Department wasn't giving him the things he needed to take the fight to ISIS and radical Islam.
Yeah.
Has that gotten better? And what would a President Graham do to strengthen the hand of King Abdullah?
Well, number one, it's gotten better, but I don't want anyone here to believe that King Abdullah is going to destroy ISIL because he can't. Now, they burned the pilot alive, and we're all upset, and the king said, we're going to give him a can of whoop ass. Now, he told me that. Now, that's the right attitude, but the capabilities of the Jordanian Air Force and the Jordanian Army are limited. So providing more weapons to the King of Jordan and arming the Kurds to a fuller extent is not going to solve the problem with ISIL. I am sick and tired of hearing people on my side avoid the idea of an American ground component. So how many of you want to destroy ISIL? That's the right goal. If you don't, they're coming here. So President Obama has articulated the right goal: degrade and destroy ISIL. His strategy is not working. And the missing component is not arming Jordan to a fuller extent, is having a strategy that will turn the tide on the ground. We have 3,500 American ground forces. You would never know it because no one ever mentions that they have boots. They are boots. There are boots on the ground, but they're not sufficient to turn the tide inside of Iraq. So yes, I would help Jordan's military, but that is no substitute for what the next commander-in-chief needs to do if you're serious about destroying ISIL. You have to start in Iraq. We need about 10,000 U.S. ground forces, not 3,500, and let me tell you what the 10,000 would be doing. They would give you more special forces capability to go after the ISIL leadership inside of Iraq morning, noon, and night. They couldn't get on the phone, they couldn't get in a car without worried about being killed. So it gives you a capacity that nobody in the region has. Embedders and trainers at the battalion level, out in the field where the fight's at, so the Iraqi security forces are less likely to cut and run. Some aviation battalions that we don't have today, American helicopters flown by American pilots to give an advantage to the Iraqi security forces, and forward air controllers to drop bombs on the right people. 70% of the aircraft return to the carrier or to the land base with the bomb still on the rack. So what I would say, the biggest flaw in Obama's strategy is not shorting Jordan, is not committing to a ground component that we need. The most significant ground component militarily inside Iraq is the Shia militia controlled by Iran. Arming the Kurds is part of a strategy, but they're not an expeditionary force. They're not going into Syria to destroy ISIL inside of Syria. They're not going to Ramadi, the Anbar province where the Sunnis live inside of Iraq, because if they tried to, you'd start another war. So here's my message to you and others. It's not about just giving more weapons to Jordan. It's about us having a stronger footprint in Iraq and eventually a ground component inside of Syria. If you're serious about degrading and destroying ISIL, what we're doing is not working. You're not going to win this war from the air.
Senator, we're here at the College of Charleston, the alma mater of the late Governor Jim Edwards, who as Secretary of Energy for Ronald Reagan was the unsung hero of missile defense. He was the guy, of course, who took Edward Teller around the bureaucrats to Reagan,
Yes.
and the rest is history. What would you do to strengthen missile defense for this country?
Well, number one, take it as a problem. That the idea of a rogue missile attack coming from an Iran with an ICBM is not a good thing. So the number one thing I would do is set this deal aside. Missile defense begins with taking ICBMs off the table for Iran. The first way to defend America is to make sure the Iranians do not have the capability to deliver a missile here. Why does the Ayatollah need an ICBM? What's that got to do with generating peaceful nuclear power? So if you don't rebuild your military budget, you can't do these things. We're going to spend, at the end of 2021, we're going to be spending 2.3% of GDP on defense, and the historical average is about 5%. We're going to have the smallest army since 1940, 420,000 troops, the smallest navy since 1915. How do you incorporate a robust missile defense system in a budget like that? Because you're having to rob operational accounts to do modernization and readiness. Operation and maintenance, readiness and modernization, personnel are the foundation of your military. All of these accounts are suffering. So yes, I want a robust missile defense system, East Coast, West Coast. I want to share it with our allies. The first thing I would do is go back into Eastern Europe and tell Putin, we're going to help our allies build a missile defense capability to protect Europe and our interests in Europe from a rogue attack coming from Iran. It's not about Russia. The biggest mistake Obama did is let the Russians back him down, withdraw our missile defense capabilities from inside of Europe. So you're not going to have a missile defense capability that you need with a budget this small. To my good friend John Kasich. Now we're having a little bit of a discussion about sequestration. Are you familiar with sequestration? It's Latin for doing really dumb stuff. So these defense cuts are a result of sequestration. The result of the Congress trying to find $1.2 trillion in savings over a decade, a noble cause. Well, since you're going to spend $47 trillion, I thought we could find $1.2 trillion. And it was going to be balanced between revenue and cuts. The super committee failed. The punishment clause was sequestration. Under this sequestration punishment clause, you would take 600, half of the 1.2, 600 billion out of the Department of Defense, and we've already cut $1 trillion. That's what leads to the smallest military footprint in modern history. So John Kasich went to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. They repair submarines. They avoided a BRAC closure process. And he told his staff, apparently, I hope you understand, taking me to this site, I'm not going to change my view about base closures. I'm not going to change my view about sequestration. Here's what I would suggest to Governor Kasich and every other person wanting to be Commander-in-Chief. If you accept sequestration, you're disarming this nation. If sequestration continues, you're gutting the ability of the military to defend this nation. So if you don't understand that, you're not ready for this job. This is not the 1990s, John. There's no peace dividend left to be gained. We're at war. We're at war with a radical ideology. We have nation states that are getting aggressive by the day, Russia and China. So here's what Lindsey Graham's going to tell the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard workers. I'm not going to engage in another round of base closures to keep you on your toes. I'm going to have your back. And to every military installation in this state, if I'm President of the United States, the days of closing bases are behind us. We're going to open up more bases, and we're going into the hiring business. So if I'm President of the United States and you're looking a way to defend America, there will be a job available for you in the armed forces.
You talk about base closure. You know, Iceland is a great NATO ally. NATO pulled out of Iceland. The Navy pulled out of Iceland. There's talk today that the Navy may go back. What would President Graham do?
You got to have ships to go back with. You got 278 operational ships. We got 11 aircraft carriers going down 10, back to 11. I think we need about 14. What I want to do is reform the Pentagon. Count me in for reforming personnel costs. This National Defense Authorization Bill is the biggest reform in the last 70 years, and I'll talk to you later about it. I'd rebuild the Navy. I would look at going to the Philippines if they would have us. I would try to find more base opportunities around China to let them know we're back. When it comes to protecting our nation, the last thing we want to do is withdraw more forces from Europe. I want Putin to see the NATO flag wherever we fly. So how do you get NATO back into the game of defending Europe and the rest of the world? There are 5 countries of the 26 that spend 2% of their GDP on defense. Germany, the most powerful economy in NATO, needs to up their game. But how do I, as Commander-in-Chief of the American Armed Forces, persuade somebody to spend more when we're gutting our own military? You lead by example. I go to the Congress and I say, we're going to set aside these defense cuts. We're going to save money, and the money's in entitlements. We're going to do something like Simpson Bowles to get us off the road to becoming Greece. But the defense budget is 20% of 1/3. You can eliminate the entire Department of Defense and not even move the debt needle. So here's what I would do. I would rebuild our military. I would try to redeploy forces in Europe, go back to Iceland, have a bigger footprint in the Far East to let China know that we're back. At the end of the day, I want NATO to regenerate itself. I want Putin not to even think about going to Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania, or any other country that has Russian speakers. I want him to see a re-emerging NATO, a NATO flag everywhere around him. I want to put him in a box, and the only way you can do that is lead from the front, not from behind. Build your military up and use it wisely.
Back to Iran, you talked about some of the problems with letting them continue with ICBM development. Let's say January 2017 comes and there's a President Graham. How do you deal with Iran and this bad deal?
I will not honor this deal. You know, the Donald wants to rewrite it. I will tear it up because it is a deal structurally flawed. If a man tells you he's going to cut your throat, do not buy him a knife. President Obama has misjudged the Ayatollah as the world misjudged Hitler. He is hoping for things to change. During the negotiations over the Iranian nuclear program, the Iranians toppled 4 Arab governments. 4 Arab capitals were toppled by Iran, in whole or in part. During the negotiations, the Houthi rebels, supported by Iran, drove a pro-American government out of Yemen. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is the second most lethal radical Sunni extremist group wanting to attack the homeland, second only to ISIL in my view. They planned the attacks in Paris. Iran, during the negotiations, shut a pro-American government down, drove us out of Yemen. We don't have special forces capability inside of Yemen to monitor Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. What would the Ayatollah do with $100 billion? If the past is any indication of the future, he's going to put it in his war machine. You might as well written a check to Assad, Hezbollah, and Hamas. The only thing I can say about this deal, it is a disaster, and the biggest mistake of all was to not connect their nuclear program with the behavior in the region. To disassociate the two was a mistake for the ages, because under this agreement, they'll have $100 billion to put into their war machine. In 5 years, they can buy new weapons. In 8 years, they can go back to building an ICBM. If you had told me a year ago that the end result would have been more money without behavior changes, anytime, anywhere inspections is 50 days, may I come by if you don't mind, self-inspection of their military facilities, and lifting the arms embargo, I would not have believed you. This is the worst negotiated deal in history. The people who brought you North Korea are now bringing you Iran. So in January 2017, if I'm Commander-in-Chief, here's what we say. I call up the Congress and say, I want to work with you, not against you. And here's what I'd like you to do. Any company that does business with Iran cannot use American banks. That's a $450 billion Iranian economy versus the largest banking system in the world. I would wait till the phone rang. Then I would try to get us a better deal. I would tell our European allies, Russia and China, I'm not going to honor this deal. I'm not going to let them buy weapons 5 years from now without objecting. And I'm going to insist on a better deal. I would sanction the regime based on their support for terrorism, and I would start all over again. Finally, if the Iranians want a peaceful nuclear power program, they can have it. Canada and Mexico have nuclear power programs. They don't enrich. If you had to make a list of countries that you'd worry about cheating, Iran would be on the top. I wouldn't give them another dollar, another bullet until they renounce terrorism, stop being the largest state sponsor of terrorism on the planet. The Marriage from Hell is a radical Islamic organization, nation state or terrorist group with a weapon of mass destruction. Under this deal, in 15 years, if they don't cheat, they'll have a clear pathway to a bomb. So I would tear this deal up and we would start all over again. I am not going to sit on the sidelines and watch the most radical regime on the planet be given money and weapons and a pathway to a bomb without objecting.
The 9/11 Commission, Senator, said that 9/11 above all else was a failure of imagination. We're always responding to the last terrorist attack rather than thinking outside the box to prevent the next one. What would President Graham do to think outside the box to prevent the next terrorist attack?
Well, number one, you've got to make, they're large, they're rich, they're entrenched. I've never seen more threats to the homeland than I do today. There are more terrorist organizations with safe havens and weapons and men to attack the homeland than any time before 9/11. ISIL holds territory the size of Indiana, but it's just not them. They're into Afghanistan now. They're going to Libya. They're all over Africa. So what would I do? I would be on their ass morning, noon, and night. We would rebuild our capabilities in Iraq. We would form a regional force to go in and destroy the caliphate inside of Syria. We would hold the territory. They're large, they're rich, they're entrenched. If I'm president, they're going to be small, they're going to be poor, and they're going to be on the run. As to thinking outside the box, I am very bullish when it comes to the military aspects of defeating radical Islam. but please don't mistake that desire for a misunderstanding on my part of the root cause. I would engage young people in the Mideast and in Africa in the most aggressive fashion possible. The terrorists are offering a glorious death. I would try to give a hopeful life to the young women and men throughout that part of the world, to the one organization. I would be your biggest friend. I would increase the global fund. I would increase aid to Africa to fight malaria and AIDS and try to provide power to Africa and not let the Chinese rape the entire continent. I would be forward-leaning. I would be building schoolhouses in remote regions and poor areas, giving a young woman a voice for her children. I would be there training armies and training police forces. I would create a NATO-like defense apparatus in the Gulf. I would bring the Arabs and the Israelis together. There's a magic moment here where Israel and their Arab neighbors have a common enemy and common needs. The desire to destroy ISIL is possessed by Saudi Arabia as well as Jerusalem. There's a unique opportunity to rebuild the Mideast, to come out of this thing stronger, to form an alliance between Israel and the Arab neighbors that we have never seen before, because the threat of ISIL is common to both, and a religious theocracy in Iran is an enemy of the world. It's ISIL versus mankind. Iran is the worst actor in the region. So thinking outside the box is trying to create a foreign policy on the diplomatic, political, and economic front that would give a generation of young people who spoke up during the Arab Spring a voice. That means a generational engagement. It means a Marshall Plan-like approach, smaller in scope, smaller in amount, but a full commitment to rebuild the Mideast, embracing social justice, the rights of women, the rights of young people. I would work with Saudi Arabia and I'd tell the king, how about letting women drive?
China, another 5 million fingerprints stolen, 22 million social security records. From a cyber warfare standpoint, they're killing us economically, national security wise. They got ships in the Bering Sea. How does President Graham deal with China?
A clenched fist and an open hand will be your choice. You pick. If you want to keep this crap up, you're going to get a clenched fist. If you want a better relationship, here's the open hand. One, rebuild your military so people will take you seriously. Our Asian allies are living in fear of America being absent in the region. It's hard to stand up to China when you have nobody standing with you. So the first thing I told you I'd do is build a larger Navy, and we would redeploy to the Far East with significance. But I would tell the president of China, if you keep cyber attacking our infrastructure, if you keep stealing our intellectual property, if you keep undervaluing your currency, you're not going to have the same trading relationship that you enjoy today. I would hit them in the pocketbook. If you keep building islands over resource-rich waters claimed by others, then you're no longer a stable member of the family of nations. We will treat you like the rogue nation you're becoming. Why are they doing these things? Because they can. It's a communist dictatorship. It is a nation that doesn't elect their leaders, and the only thing they will understand is pushback. While it would hurt our economy to begin to use our economic, to put them on notice about trading relationships, it would hurt us. It would hurt them more. The world has a pair of twos and we have a full house. We're not playing our cards very well. I don't want a war with anyone. I'd like to have a peaceful relationship with everybody who's willing to engage us peacefully, but I will not be walked over. So I would rebuild our military, redeploy to Asia. I would put China on notice that if you continue the cyber attacks, the intellectual property thefts, if you continue to try to steal market share by intimidating your neighbors, you're going to have an economic realignment with the United States. You will not be most favored nation. And that will hurt you in the short term, but it will hurt them more. And here's what we can't allow. We can't allow Asia to fall under the domination of a China that seems to not have any of the values that we share.
Would President Graham be giving a state dinner tonight at the White House for the Chinese leader?
You know, I don't care what kind of dinner we have. I don't care if I take him to McDonald's or treat him to a state dinner. It's about the message. And here's what I really believe. With me, you know what you're getting. There are very few people in the world I haven't met of consequence because I've been busting my butt over the last decade to understand this world. I think our allies, particularly in the Mideast, would sleep better at night, whether you're an Arab or an Israeli, knowing that I'm here and America is back. I don't know the president of China very well. I've met him once. But I know who we are very well. We're the good guys and gals. We're the people who insist that the world be run in a certain fashion. So we'd have a quiet conversation, and I would give him a choice. Here are your choices. If you want a good, healthy relationship, it is there to be had. If you continue these provocative actions, you're making a mistake of a lifetime. Now you choose, but choose wisely, my friend.
It's not just China that's engaging in cyber warfare in America. It's radical Islamists. Iranians are hacking into banking systems. You've got ISIS actively trying to recruit young people here now into their ranks on social media. How does President Graham win the cyber war?
Well, the cyber threat to us is right up there with the weapons of mass destruction in the hands of Islamic terrorists. Number one, you're no stronger than your weakest link. So to every contractor in the Department of Defense, you're no stronger than the smallest contractor. Can you penetrate their systems? You can penetrate the entire system. So we're going to up our game, and if you don't increase your budget, you can't do this. How do you rebuild all these systems that are in decline without more spending? Reform, yes, but the footprint for the military, spending-wise, is too small to build a new missile defense system and create an aggressive cyber infrastructure, not only to attack back, but to defend yourself. The business community, financial and power, is in the hands of the private sector. President Graham would create an incentive for all the critical infrastructure entities in the country to harden their infrastructure to the best business practices now available. I would not do this through a regulatory environment because the environment changes too quickly. But I would give liability protection to every major business entity in America who operates in the critical infrastructure arena, liability protection in case there's a cyber attack if you'll just upgrade your system to the best standards possible and would have an auditing method to do it. You've got to incentivize the private sector to up their game. Then you have to have rules of engagement. What is a cyber attack? At what point do we respond, and what are the tools available to respond with? I would create a rules of engagement. I would share it with our allies and our enemies, and I'd put them on notice as to what lines they cross and what consequences would occur if they cross those lines. None of this is possible without working in a bipartisan fashion between the business community, the Congress, and the White House to create incentives to harden the infrastructure that is vulnerable to a cyber attack in the private sector. Rules of engagement are missing, and the capability to defend this nation in the cyber arena cannot be achieved until you up military spending.
Before I go to the next question, we are soon going to be taking some questions from the audience. If you've got a question, Jonathan's right over here. Just raise your hand, give them to him, and he'll be bringing those to me. Senator Kim Jong-un, he's more unpredictable. In addition to having a bad hairdo, I think the guy's got some mental health challenges, but he's more unpredictable than his father and his grandfather. How do you deal with North Korea?
Well, North Korea is best dealt with China working with the United States. China is the lead benefactor of North Korea. The idea that North Korea is going to build more nuclear weapons should scare everybody in this room. It is a nation in the hands of a crazy man. The military runs the place. The current leader, I think, is at best unstable. So this is a dangerous situation. China has the keys to North Korea. If you could build a better relationship with China, I think you could contain the threats that the world is faced with in North Korea, but you have to keep the sanctions on. You have to help South Korea and Japan. Here's what I worry about the most. If America continues to lead from behind, and we're not seen as a reliable ally, people are going to go on their own. It amazes me that South Korea and Japan have not gone down the nuclear road to counter what they see as a threat from North Korea. Unlike North Korea, if the Iranians get a pathway to a bomb, every Arab nation who can afford it is going to counter that pathway with a nuclear program of their own. Israel is known to have nuclear weapons. They won't admit it, but it's widely known. I find it interesting that not one Arab nation felt the need to get a nuclear program in response to Israel's program. Every Arab nation has told me to my face that can afford it, that anything you give the Shiites in Iran, we're going to want ourselves. Japan and South Korea at the moment have not felt the need to go nuclear because they're growing threats from North Korea. The one thing I would do is reassure Japan and South Korea and our friends in that part of the world, you need not go down that road. I literally have your back. Try to find a strategy with China to eventually bring about regime change. This regime in North Korea is the most oppressive and brutal on the planet, and that is saying a lot. And it should be our goal to find relief for the North Korean people over time by using our influence with China and other countries to have a change over time in North Korea.
When George W. Bush was president, our current Secretary of Defense actually co-authored an op-ed where he expressed concern that Bush wasn't tough enough on North Korea. What's your view of the current Secretary of Defense?
Good man, serving a president who has no idea what he's doing. Barack Obama is the most ill-suited man in modern history to be commander-in-chief. He's a law professor whose worldview is out of sync with the world as it is. When he sends B-2s, when he sends F-22s, nobody really cares because they know the man behind the sending. If I sent one, people would take notice. If you really want to influence Asia, we're going to have to rebuild our reach. So at the end of the day, the biggest problem we have in the world started when Obama drew a red line against Assad and said, if you cross it, if you use chemical weapons, that will be the end of you. He crossed the line and he will be in power and Obama will be gone. The next president of the United States needs to address this central problem. You got to prove to the world that you're different than Barack Obama. You got to prove to the world that you're strong and responsible. You have to rebuild your military to show commitment to having America with the capacity to change outcomes. My foreign policy has three components to it: superior capability, overwhelming capacity, and determined will. I'm not looking for a fair fight. The next president of the United States needs to set who we are in the eyes of our enemies and our friends, and I intend to do that.
The current FBI director says he's got open files in all 50 states of America looking at people with potential connections to ISIS. Now we've got this refugee crisis situation. ISIS is saying they're going to try to use that to infiltrate people. How do we vet the refugees to prevent ISIS from doing that?
We do the best we can, but we can't disconnect the character of the nation from our national security. I would argue it's hard to be a strong nation without being a good nation. Does that make sense to you? I've seen this coming a long time, Dan. It's been breaking my heart. 3 years ago, Assad was on the ropes. Obama's entire national security team advised him to train the Free Syrian Army when it would have mattered and to have a no-fly zone to push Assad out. Obama said no. And to all those who worried about what if we get involved, look what happens when we don't get involved. There's choices to be made here. Do you get involved or you stay on the sidelines? Training the Free Syrian Army is no longer a viable option, in my view. We spent $500 million and we've got very little to show for it. Syria is literally hell on earth. I would take more refugees, thoroughly vet the best we can, but more than anything else, I would stop the flow of refugees and why they are leaving Syria in such large numbers. A year from now, if we don't get a handle on Syria, Lebanon and Jordan could fall. The next two victims of the war in Syria, I'm afraid, are going to be allies of ours, neighbors to Syria. The worst is yet to come. So I would establish safe havens, no-fly zones inside of Syria, to give people a place to stay in their country so they don't have to come over here. Yes, I'd be willing to take more refugees, but it's not enough to take the woman who's been raped. I want to go after the rapist. You'll never stop this war, this flood of refugees, until you deal with ISIL inside of Syria. There's nobody left to train, in my view, effectively to destroy ISIL and push Assad out. Russia's intervention on behalf of Assad is a nightmare for you. It means the war doesn't end. He's the magnet for radical Sunni extremists. Al-Nusra, ISIL, and all these other groups are going to keep fighting to push the Alawite aligned with Iran out. So keeping him in power means that these groups, they love this, by the way. Keeping him in power means that the Syrian people will never come together because they're not going to rally around Assad. He's destroyed their country and killed 250,000 members of their family. So Russia's intervention on behalf of Assad is a game changer in all the worst ways. So we need a ground component that can destroy ISIL and at the same time push Assad out. That's going to take a regional force. We'll have to be part of that regional force.
Right. And here's a question from the audience. Thank you for your support of the One Foundation. Is it safe to say that if you were president, you would support the continued funding of foreign aid for health-related issues? Ebola is a great example of how this is important to our national security.
You can count on me of building up the 150 account, which I'm in charge of, which is all foreign aid, foreign assistance, is 1% of the federal budget. 1% of the entire federal budget is the aid to the world. Our refugee accounts internationally have been devastated. The World Food Bank is broke. To those who want to turn your back on Syria, you do so at your own peril. To those who don't believe in helping others, you do so at your own peril. The only way you're going to win this war is to build others up. Where I find will to fight radical Islam, to be a friend of America, I will give it capacity. Africa is the prize of the 21st century. I've been there with Bono, I've been there with Bill Gates, I've been there with Rick Lowry, I've been there with faith-based groups. I've seen Africa up close and personal. We got a chance, if you got the right president, to close the deal in Africa. We're inside the 10-yard lines in terms of eradicating AIDS in about 5 major nations in Africa. We're turning the corner on malaria. We're trying to improve the ability of the family farmer to increase by tenfold their crops to have disposable income. All of that is at risk under sequestration. The 150 account, which is 1% of the budget, is also caught in these cuts, and we're going to lose the ability to fund the Global Fund, which is a matching fund, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is a new way of delivering foreign assistance based on a metric contract. All that's going to be lost. This is insane to the Rand Pauls of the world, who believe we're not going to help anybody who burns the American flag. Well, you're turning our whole foreign policy over to radical people. If you understood the world and they're yearning for us to be involved in it, you would embrace the One program. You would help Bill Gates and Rick Lowry. You would help those NGOs that are trying to provide assistance to Africa and throughout the Mideast, because helping people build up their economy, providing health programs that keep their children safe is the best investment you can make.
You alluded to this earlier. The Army today has been cut to pre-World War II levels. We've got more admirals than we've got ships today. How does President Graham rebuild our nation's military? In
our defense authorization bill, we cut headquarters by 30%. We're trying to reduce headquarters staff by 30% to get people back out in the fight. Military retirees, prospectively, people are living longer. You know, Strom lived to be 100. That's going to be the norm here pretty soon. That's the good news. But you have a young man or woman comes in at 18, they retire at 38. God bless them. But in the future, we're going to have a different deal. You'll get 40% of your base pay at retirement, and you'll have a thrift savings plan that goes as follows. 85% of the people serving the military leave without a dime. I want to change that. So we're going to allow military members to put 5% of their base pay into a thrift savings account. The government will match 5%, and you can put 5% with government matching from 2 years to 20 years, and that money will be yours. If you leave before 20, you can access it, and you'll have something to show for your service. So to the person who goes to 20, you'll get 40%, but when you get 59 and a half, that savings plans will be available to you. You'll be more than made whole. It will help the military with our personnel costs. So what I want to do is I want to reform the way we do business. Military retirees like me are going to have to pay a little more in terms of TRICARE premiums. Count me in for reforming the Pentagon. Cost plus contracts will give away to fixed price contracts. But there is no substitute for adequate military spending. You can't reform your way to where we need to go.
And speaking of that Graham military, what would the role of the National Guard, our reserve forces, the citizen soldier be? How would they fit into a President Graham force structure?
During the Cold War, where I was in Germany from 84 to 88. You know why I like Ronald Reagan so much? I was a young captain, came on active duty in 1982. My pay went up by 1/3. I like Ronald Reagan. So we were in Europe. We had a reserve component, but really defending the Fulda Gap. The reserves had a different, the combat arms of the reserve component is the Guard. Support is the Army Reserve. That's all changed in the War on Terror. I'd have a very robust reserve Guard component. I would not take attack helicopters out of the Army, knock this off, out of the National Guard. We're not going to turn the National Guard into a support organization. The Pentagon is trying to rob Peter to pay Paul because they've got budget problems. They're trying to go to the reserves and take capability out of the reserves to help the active forces because it's a budget-driven enterprise. So I would build up the active forces. We'd have about a 500,000 person Army, not 420,000. We would grow the Navy to about 350 ships, more if we need them. We would rebuild the Air Force in terms of manpower and capability. Half of the combat-coded squadrons in the Air Force will be unable to fly by 2021. We're going to buy more F-35s, and I would look at buying more F-22s. And John Kasich, my good friend from Iowa, stopped the B-2 program at 22. That was a mistake. We'll look at a manned bomber anew, but for the Guard and Reserve. The day job of the reservist and the Guard member is a national treasure in this war. To destroy radical Islam, that means we've got to be partnered with people throughout the world. So a Guard unit or Reserve unit, a person who's a plumber during the day, can do two things, can be a warfighter, but also can provide capacity to that community, particularly in Africa that's trying to build itself up. You have community planners in the Guard and Reserve that could take their skill set in their day job and help the overall war effort. The first thing I would do is inventory the talent we have in the Guard and Reserve when it comes to helping people build up their resources, and have identified people in the Guard and Reserve that could go to the fight in a very effective fashion. So if I'm President of the United States, the Guard and Reserve are going to have the best equipment, not second class. They're going to be used wisely. They will be used less often because the rotation schedules are killing recruiting and retention.
And again, if you have any questions, Jonathan's right here. Another question from the audience, Senator. As President, would you support a comprehensive reform of the Department of Veterans Affairs?
The best reform of the VA is as follows. Give every American veteran who's eligible a card to go anywhere they want, anytime they want, to purchase any health care service available consistent with what is authorized. What will that do? Those VA facilities that are doing a poor job will close because the veteran will vote with their feet. The ones who do a good job we will fund. So the fundamental change I will bring to the VA is choice. To allow the veteran to go anywhere they want, anytime they want, to purchase health care consistent with what's available to them in the private sector. I am not going to do away with the VA. I'm going to find out what works in the VA and what doesn't. And you know who will tell me what works and what doesn't? The veteran.
Robert Mueller, the former FBI director, said in 2011 we caught 59,000 people from than Mexico trying to come across our border from countries like Yemen, Iran, Syria. We've even caught a radical Islamic cleric in the back of a BMW trying to cross southern border.
I hope he didn't buy it in Greenville.
I hope not either. But what would you do as president to secure our southern border?
Well, you got a border with Canada and Mexico. I'd make sure both of them are secure. I wouldn't build a wall in Canada. I've never met an illegal Canadian. They may be out there. I'm looking for them. I haven't found any yet. 40% of our illegal immigrants are visa overstays. I changed the visa system that the day your visa expired, every law enforcement group in the country would know about it, so it wouldn't be long before you got deported. The hijackers all came here on their visas. Control your border, secure your border. It's a national security issue. It's one thing to put a roof on a building, it's another thing to blow it off. What do I worry about the most? Homegrown terrorism. Our FBI budget is being cut to historical lows. The FBI is in charge of cybersecurity. They're also in charge of making sure we pick up on homegrown terrorism plots. The stronger ISIL is perceived over there, the more enticing they are here in terms of recruitment. If they were shown to be the losers they are, I think the desire to join that organization would go down pretty quickly. There's a perfect storm building for another 9/11. Now listen to this, a perfect storm. We're reducing our capabilities on the military, law enforcement, and intelligence side to historic lows, and the threats to our nation are at historic highs. Does that make any sense? We're on a pathway for another attack. So I would secure our border. I would double the number of Border Patrol agents from 20,000 to 40,000, giving you one every 1,000 feet. I would triple the number of drones to have 24/7 look at the border 100%. I would put sensors in the desert like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan to pick up intrusions to our country. I would build up interior enforcement capability so they could be deployed wherever the threat comes from. I would invest heavily in improving Homeland Security. I would rebuild the FBI's ability to track homegrown threats. They cannot handle the number of threats. They're being overwhelmed. The biggest threat I see is Syria. There are 2,000 foreign fighters a month with Western passports going to Syria. It's just a matter of time till they breach our defenses, like they did in Paris. It's just a matter of time that some of these people come here. That's why it's so important to get ISIL in a smaller configuration on the run in Iraq and Syria. Our interior security is very much at risk because of budget cuts. And the balance between security and individual liberty, I am sensitive to, but let me just say this. If there's a terrorist that we know of on one end of the phone and somebody else is on the other end of the phone, I want to know what you're talking about. We'll get a court order, but we're not fighting a war. And if we capture somebody who's a high-value target, if I'm President of the United States, the last thing they're going to hear is you have a right to remain silent. We're going to hold them as enemy combatants. We're going to give them due process consistent with the United States Constitution and that of an enemy combatant. You will be presented to a federal judge, and the government will have to prove that you are a member of the terrorist organization that we claim you are. If we find that you are and the judge agrees with us, we're going to hold you, interrogate you humanely under the laws of war, but we're going to take the time it takes to find out what you know about a future attack. I want you to understand, I believe we're at war. The people we're fighting did not want to steal your car. They wanted to destroy your life.
Senator, our technology is changing so quickly these days, but our government is so stovepiped and lacks the ability to analyze and respond quick enough. So it really is, as the technology increases, the threats are increasing exponentially. How does President Graham deal with that?
Well, again, you got to rebuild capacity. You got to get the best minds of our time, right? You've got to take national security you've got to look at the threats we face as we did in the Cold War. We have to have a president who will lead the world to create uniform rules of detention so that we create international terrorism as the threat it is. But investing in the technology that would give us an advantage over our enemies in the cyber arena would be a priority. Building aircraft that no enemy can shoot down would be a priority. Having submarines in enough numbers to make sure that every nation state who threatened us realized they could not survive an attack on the United States because we have superior capability. Spay wars here in Charleston, are you familiar with it? Boy, would they be a beneficiary of a grand presidency, because they take technology we have and they take it to the next level. I am not looking for a fair fight, folks. I'm not looking for a contest that's equal. I'm looking for an overwhelming capability against every enemy we face. But here's the problem with terrorism. When you're fighting a kamikaze pilot, it's different than if you're fighting somebody who wants to return to the base. China and Russia have a sense of rationality about them. Radical Islam is a religious movement that is compelled by their view of God to kill everybody in this room, to create a caliphate within their faith, bend every Muslim to their will, to destroy the one and only Jewish state, and to come after democracies like ours. If you don't understand there will never be peace through strength for radical Islam, you're making a mistake. The motto of my campaign is security through strength. Why did I say security versus peace? Ronald Reagan understood you could have peace if you were strong. He understood that if you called the Soviet Union the evil empire, over time it would wear down. The one thing different between the Cold War and this war is that you're fighting an extremist group that has to be contained and eventually destroyed. There will never be a peace negotiation between ISIL and anyone. There has to be the building up of others in the region to destroy this radical movement within the faith. To all those on my side who keep talking about Muslims, let me tell you what Lindsey Graham thinks about Muslims. I've been to Iraq and Afghanistan 35 times. I've seen with my own eyes the fight that people have taken to radical Islam. I've had friends that I work with to be killed, to be replaced by somebody else, trying to protect their family and their way of life from radical Islam. The overwhelming majority of people within the faith reject this ideology. If you lump them together, you're doing a great disservice to those people, and you're making a mistake as commander-in-chief. The winning partnership is between America, the Western world, and people within the faith to destroy this ideology over time. So I want to let you know that I understand how this movie ends. We win, they lose. They're not 10 feet tall. If you had the right American ground component working with the Iraqis, we would push them out of Ramadi and Mosul. If you had the right regional force with an American component, you would destroy them inside of Syria. If you didn't leave too soon and you stuck with it, a generation from now, you'd have a transformed Mideast. Do not tell me that all of them are the same, because they're not. I am very bullish on where we can go with the right American leadership. We will win this war. I intend to win this war, and I understand the way you win this war is you partner with people who are willing to destroy the ideology within the faith. And here's what our commitment will be under President Graham. Whatever it takes, as long as it takes, until we defeat them.
Senator, we're almost out of time. This has been great. I want to thank you for being here today. Last question. Port and harbor security is something very important to the people of Charleston. And what would you do to improve port and harbor security? And then take advantage of the time to give us any concluding remarks.
Well, number one, Charleston's port, if it doesn't go to 52 feet, it becomes a backwater port. It's been the biggest issue for me since I've been your senator. We're one step away from closing the deal. About 3 years ago, we were going to lose the port. We do not have a national infrastructure game plan. The Corps of Engineers do a good job, for the most part. The Congress's budget here has been uneven. The Corps' budget is subject to sequestration cuts. The Mississippi River is being clogged. Our portside infrastructure on the East Coast and the West Coast is being left behind by the Mideast, China, and other places. Not only do I want to deepen the port, I want to improve the capacity of East Coast ports to take the Panamax shipping that's coming through the Panama Canal. Ships on the oceans 10 years from now will be 3 times the size they are today. We're going to get to 52 feet in Charleston. That means 24/7 access to our port to make us one of the most viable ports in the United States and the world, because we do such a good job here. When we get to 52 feet, we can take these ships 24/7. The West Coast have a different problem. They have portside capacity problems. They can pull into the ports, but they don't have the infrastructure to get the cargo off. The Mississippi River is completely clogged up. We need to dredge it so we can get commerce moving inside of the country to export and import products, which is the future of our economy. As to national security, there was a pilot program here in Charleston between the Coast Guard, local law enforcement, federal law enforcement agencies, the Department of Homeland Security, to make sure that we know what every ship has before they get to the port, that we meet them out there before they get here. I would expand that. Where's the most likely terrorist attack coming? Something inside of a ship that originates from the Mideast that pulls into one of our harbors. We're going to have a line of defense on port security that starts off our coast, that it's not good enough to check them when they get here. There will be a line. It will be like a toll gate where we will find out what you've got before you get close to us. If we don't up our game on port security, I think it's one of the weakest areas in our entire national defense infrastructure. So I want to deepen our ports to be economically competitive. We need deeper ports on the East Coast. We need to dredge the Mississippi River, and we need to fix our West Coast port infrastructure. It takes about $20 billion. How can you do these things if you're broke? So I'm going to end with this. I'm going to declare war on radical Islam with an uncompromising will to destroy it. When it comes back here at home, I'm going to seek the common ground that we desperately need to find. What drives the debt? How many people are here born between 1946 and 1964? How many people are born after 1964? Good luck. 80 billion of us are going to retire in the baby boom generation. We're going to want our Social Security checks, and we're going to want our Medicare bills paid. How many workers are there for every retiree today? 3. In 1950, how many were they? 16. How do 2 people in 20 years pay the bills for 80 million people? In 20 years, there'll be 2 people paying FICA taxes into a Social Security trust fund that's being depleted. By 2040, all the money young people in this room send to Washington to pay taxes goes to Medicare, Social Security, and interest on the debt. There won't be a dime left to defend this nation. 71% of federal spending is in entitlements. About a third, a little less than a third, is discretionary spending, including the VA and the Department of Defense. If you eliminated the Department of Defense, you couldn't balance the budget, even come close. So here's what I promise future generations. To be a president like Ronald Reagan, who seeks out a Democrat to help me fix this. Remember the joke I made? You know, Reagan and O'Neill started drinking, and good things happen. That's what it takes. That's what we'll do in Washington. What's wrong with Washington is that we don't know each other anymore. We are constantly in the game of running each other down. That needs to stop. There's a lot of hope behind President Obama, and he's fallen short. He's a distant figure to most of us in Washington, including Democrats. The next president of the United States needs to be able to do two things. Rebuild our military, be a commander-in-chief worthy of the sacrifice of the 1%, and get us off the course for becoming Greece. How do you fix this problem? Have you heard of Simpson Bowles? Let me tell you what that means. Like Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, it's time to adjust the age of retirement once again. We adjusted Social Security retirement from 65 to 67, and that saved Social Security for 40 years. Because we're living longer, it's time to look at doing that again. We never adjusted the age of retirement of Medicare. It's time to do that. I make $175,000 a year. When I was 21, living in central South Carolina, my mom and dad owned a liquor store, a bar, and a pool room. That's why I'd be a good president for you. We grew up in one room in the back. Life was good until it wasn't. When my mom got sick at 21, she passed away from Hodgkin's disease. I was 21, and we got wiped out because of the medical bills. 15 months later, my dad died. I'm 22, my sister's 13. We move in with an aunt and uncle who worked in the textile plants that are all now closed. They never made over $25,000 in their life. If it wasn't for a Social Security survivor benefit check, we wouldn't have made it. If it wasn't for college loans, my sister would never graduated from here. I'm 60 years old, I'm not married, I don't have any kids. I'm part of the problem, I guess. The bottom line is I'd give up some of my benefits to save a system that's worth saving. Half of today's seniors would be in poverty without a Social Security check. So how do I make all this happen? How do I spend the money we need to rebuild the military? How do we help the world if we're a debtor nation? How do I help the one campaign in the global fund if I don't address the elephant in the room, which is the debt? Here's the good news. There's a solution available. It requires leadership and some level of sacrifice. What would I do? I would get Democrats and Republicans in a room, would adjust the age of retirement for younger workers to delay entry into the trust fund to give it some breathing space. We'd ask people my income level to pay less, pay more into Medicare because we should, and take a little less out of Social Security because we have to. Then I'd flatten out the tax code. I'd eliminate deductions for the few at the expense of the many. I'd have a smaller rate, make corporations pay it. And I'd put some money down to debt. By eliminating deduction, you bring money back into the Treasury. I'd lower rates and put the money on debt. If we could do that, then the baby boomers retire with dignity. We leave younger people the American dream. If we can't get that done, we become Greece. We're running out of time. How do you do that without a Democrat working with a Republican? How do you fix immigration without a Democrat working with a Republican and vice versa? I had a primary in this state. I had 6 people running against me. My big sin was that I worked on immigration. Somebody better fix immigration. I have a plan to do it. And we're not going to deport 11 million people, but we can deport felons. After you secure your border, we'll get this right. Here's what I promise everybody in the country in South Carolina. If I'm president of the United States, we're going to go on the offense when it comes to radical Islam. We're going to reestablish ourselves in the world. If I'm president of the United States, we're going to solve problems. I openly embrace bipartisanship in a Republican primary. I will generate revenue by eliminating the tax deduction in the tax code if Democrats will means test and age adjust. There's nothing I will not do for this country, including compromise. I want to be president of the United States because I think I'm the most qualified in the times in which we live to do 2 things. Rebuild our defenses and use them smartly and bring us together, because the best indication of what I'll do in the future is what I've done in the past. And being from the reddest of red states, I have on more than one occasion taken on hard topics like immigration, energy, and climate to try to find solutions. To me, that's exactly what the next president needs to be able to do. And when I ask a Democrat to work with me in Washington, they'll know who I am. And they understand that I'm willing to give some. And I think that will help reset what's wrong in Washington right now. John Boehner is retiring. We've lost a good man who has tried his best to run the House in a responsible fashion. If you're looking for an ideologue, I am not your pick. If you're looking for a conservative who's willing to work with somebody like a Tip O'Neill, I'm your best hope. Thank you.
Sir, thanks for being with us.